Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanao Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti 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 Chaitanyam Sarvagam Sarvam Sarvabhuta Guhashayam Yat Sarva Vishayatitam Tasmai Sarva Vide Namaha. Om. Excuse me. Welcome back. This doesn't sound like it's not normal. I don't know what happened here. Om, test. I don't know, somehow the level is changing. Okay. You can hear okay? It wasn't loud enough before. You could hear me just because my voice projects without the sound system. Big mouth, anyway. Welcome back. Nice to see you all. Welcome to all the students attending this class online. We continue with our study of Shankara's Upadesha Sahasri, and in chapter 14, where Shankara is talking about several topics, main topic, of course, being the nature of consciousness, which is the central teaching. I would say I can't say the ultimate teaching of Advaita Vedanta, but we can say a central teaching of Advaita Vedanta is leading you to discover that the consciousness present in your experience right this moment, the consciousness you think is ordinary, is in fact extraordinary. So that's perhaps one of the main topics of this particular chapter. Also, he's talked about krita krityata, that absolute contentment, and we'll come back to that in this class. Still not hearing it right. Okay. Maybe I should turn these speakers back on, because I'm not hearing. Anyway, I'll look at that later. Sound system. All right, before we continue, before the text, there's one question related to the difficulty in understanding exactly what consciousness is. Remember in the last class, Shankara gave that dream metaphor, which is given, we use dream many times because it's one of our major states of experience. Basically, you have 3 states of experience. Right now, waking state, then dream state, and then dreamless sleep. So dream state is 1/3 of your experience. Since Vedanta is meant to address our experience, and it's important to talk about dream state. And in that discussion, we said whatever happens in the dream is directly known. If you see a cow in your dream, interesting comparison. If you see a cow in your dream, that cow is directly known. If you see a cow standing outside the window, not very likely, but if you were to see a cow standing out there, that cow would be indirectly known by comparison to the dream cow. Can you understand why from our past discussions? You can, of course, because we have this intermediate mechanism called eyesight involved in seeing the cow outside the window. But to see the cow in a dream, you don't need eyesight. That cow is immediately present in your experience. But then the question she has is, then why don't we remember our dreams most of the time? Now, the confusion here is memory belongs to the mind, not to consciousness. Consciousness doesn't remember a thing, which is good because, memories can kind of hang on you and distract you and pull you down. Consciousness has no memory. Memory is a mental faculty. So one of the challenges we've talked about in this class many times is the distance between consciousness and mind is zero, which means they're a little hard to differentiate what is consciousness and what is mind. We have to be extremely discerning, and that's what we will do in this class, as always. Okay, we can continue with verse 32. Yes. Continuing to describe. Let's see the verse, and I'll give some comments here. Atmanam sarvabhutastam, Atmanam sarvabhutastam, amitram chatmanopiyaha, amitram chatmanopiyaha, pasyanitchatyasau nunam, pasyatyasau nunam, shiti kartum vibhavasau, shiti kartum vibhavasau. Maybe this is the problem. Oops, sorry. Let's see if that fixes. The problem is for me, not for you. Anyway, let's try this. Om, om, om. Okay, we'll try that. Okay. So here, this is almost a humorous way of describing the nature of consciousness. So let's see the verse first. You have to pick up yaha at the end of the second line and pashyet at the beginning of the third line. Yaha pashyet, one who sees, and sees in a figurative sense, not with your eyes, but one who understands, one who thinks. One who thinks what? Atmanam, first line, sarvabhutastam, atma, which abides in all beings. One who thinks that it is its second line, that cha atmanaha, we have to break, atmanaha amitram. It is mitram, you know. Amitram, enemy. Atmanaha mitram, an enemy of oneself. Someone who ridiculously thinks that the Atma, the so-called inner divinity that dwells in all people, is actually Atmanaha amitram, an enemy to oneself. How ridiculous is that? And Shankara points out how ridiculous that is nunam, certainly, as if asau, that person, itchati, in the middle of that, you have to break all the words apart. Itchati, that person, it's as though that person, itchati once, shiti kartum, to make cold. It's an infinitive. To make cold, to make what fire? To make what cold? Vibhavasum, one of the many words for fire. That person, as though wants to make fire cold, which is absurd, and what's important here, contrary to your experience. In your experience, can fire be cold? No. A scientist may object here. The sun is millions of degrees. The fire of a match or something is only, 800,000 degrees, not that hot. So the scientist may say, compared to the sun, this candle flame is cold. And from a scientific perspective, that's fine. We're talking about experiential perspective. You put your finger in that candle flame, it's colder than the sun, it still burns. Experience. And here's the experiential proof of the nature of consciousness. This is so important and so simple. When your mind becomes quiet in meditation, And it does so gradually, right? So as your mind gradually becomes more and more quiet, there's kind of less of your mind, less of mental noise, less experience of the world around you, but Atma remains the same. Consciousness remains the same. Consciousness doesn't become less, the mind becomes less. So we could say in your experience resulting from the mind becomes less in meditation, and the experience due to pure consciousness, it doesn't become more, but relatively it becomes more. Remember, it stays the same. Consciousness is unchanging. In meditation, your consciousness stays unchanging, but if your mind becomes less, by comparison, consciousness becomes more. Does that make sense? Little bit of logic there. Mind becomes less prominent in your experience. When that happens, tell me, do you feel, and it's gradual, right, in meditation, do you feel like you are approaching something desirable or something undesirable? To me, this is so instructive. As your mind becomes more quiet, everyone has the sense that the more quiet the mind becomes, the closer I come to something which is absolutely desirable. So this is evidence of Atma's nature as Ananda. Chit, we've been talking about a lot, consciousness, but that Atma is also Ananda, that which is ultimately desirable. So to deny that Atma is Ananda is to deny your own experience in meditation. This is Shankara's point, and you can see him using a whole variety of approaches to help us understand the nature of consciousness. He goes at it from this side, from that side, from each side, hoping that all of these approaches collectively will make you see very clearly. Let us continue. Prajna prananukaryatma, prajna prananukaryatma, chayevakshari gochara, chayevakshari gochara, dhyayati veti choktohi, dhyayati eva choktohi, shuddho mukta swato hi saha, shuddho mukta swato hi saha. End of the first line, Atma. What about that Atma? Second line. It is Chaya Eva, breaking the words apart, Akshari Gocharaha. Shankara is introducing here the famous metaphor. Now, and he does so with one word. It's like shorthand, very cryptic. He gives you one word, chaya. Now, and the conventional word of chaya is shadow, but conventionally it's often used in the sense of reflection. So he's referring with that one word, chaya, to the common Vedantic metaphor, drishtanta, of light reflected in a bucket of water. And we've used in this class that metaphor many, many times. The bucket represents your body. The water within it represents your sukshma sharira, and especially your mind. The light, remember in your science class, incident light and reflected light? Incident light is the so-called Paramatma. Reflected light is Jivatma. Of course, Atma is Atma, light is light. But the point of that metaphor, that we've used so many times is to point out that the reflected light is conditioned by the ripples in the water. So Paramatma is unconditioned consciousness. Jivatma is conditioned consciousness. This language is quite important. Paramatma, unconditioned consciousness. Jivatma, unconditioned consciousness. Of course, excuse me. In samadhi, when your mind becomes perfectly silent, that's like light shining off a perfectly still surface. So the light, incident light, reflected light, Paramatma, but in this case, there's no difference. When that water is perfectly still, there's no difference between the consciousness illumining the mind and the consciousness reflected by the mind. There is only Paramatma in samadhi. But the point of this verse is to talk about that conditioned consciousness. So he says that Atma is chaya eva, like the reflection in the water, which is akshari gocharaha, the reflection which is gochara, seen, experienced with your eyes, etc. So just like the reflection in the water, he says in the first line, Atma is prajna, prana, anukarya. Anukarya, it takes the form. It takes the form of prana and prajna. Here, prana refers to, actually Shankara is going to, in the next verse, he's going to use these two terms in a slightly different way. Let me introduce that right now. Here, prajna represents your mind. And here, prana represents your ability to function, to act. So we could say that prana represents your jnana shakti, and these are the terms used in the commentary on the next verse. Don't worry about the details. So prana represents your mind and your mind's capacity to know, and prana represents all the capacities of your body, therefore representing kriya shakti, your power to act. So your mind has a power to know, your body has a power to act, and we conventionally attribute this jnana shakti and kriya shakti to atma. Atma knows, atma acts. But in fact, atma does nothing at all. We told that joke in the last class. My guru said Atma does nothing at all, therefore Atma is good for nothing. According to my guru, Atma is good. It does nothing. It doesn't know anything. Your mind is engaged in that process of knowing. It doesn't do anything. Your prana, your body, is involved in doing things. He's going to expand upon that in the next verse. But can your mind know anything without consciousness? Of course not. Can your body do anything in the absence of consciousness? There's no way, first of all, there's no way of the absence of consciousness. It's just an impossibility. So we can say, in the presence of consciousness, your mind knows. In the presence of consciousness, your body acts. But we attribute that power of knowing and power of acting to consciousness. Consciousness which is prajna prana anukari. It takes the form of the mind's functions and the body's functions. And that word anukati, it's an interesting word. Almost like when you pour water into a pot, that water assumes the form of the pot. Consciousness assumes the form of the mind's thinking. Consciousness assumes the form, so to speak, of the body's actions. So now he relates this to a famous statement. Try this. A famous statement in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, a statement that says, Dhyayati eva, lelayati eva. That doesn't all come in here. And here the rishi in the Upanishad is describing the nature of consciousness, which dhyayati eva, it can mean meditate, but here in this context just means becomes quiet. And then lelayati eva becomes active. So we all have that experience of being quiet, of being active. I am quiet, I am active, but consciousness is not quiet. Consciousness is not active. So the quietude and activity of the body and mind are attributed wrongly to Atma. Therefore, the Upanishad, the Rishi, uses this favorite word in Sanskrit, eva, as though. Dhyayati eva. Atma as though becomes quiet. Lelayati eva. Atma as though becomes active. And that's important because we all experience quietude and activity. And we have to connect these teachings to our experience. And here's where that connection is made. Even though Atma is unchanging and does nothing, Atma seems to be engaged in change and activity, eva. It is as though. And it seems so because of as illustrated by the prior metaphor, just like light seems to ripple when it's reflected by the ripples of the water. And he, therefore, ch14, since this is said in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, therefore, saha, that saha atma, that atma is shuddhaha, pure, muktaha, free, swataha, by its own nature. That consciousness doesn't do anything which is crucial. It's not affected by anything. This is where these teachings relate to our day-to-day life. And that is the consciousness that's present right now in your experience cannot be hurt, injured, affected by anything whatsoever that happens in your life, in your day-to-day life. Anyway, this idea gets expanded upon in the next verse. Let's see that. Apranasya manaskasya, apranasya manaskasya, tata samsargino drishehe, tata samsargino drishehe, vyomavad vyapino hyasya, vyomavad vyapino hyasya, katam karyam bhavet mama, katam karyam bhavet mama. So, drishehe, end of the second line. Drishehe, for the seer, for consciousness. What about that consciousness? For that consciousness, which is, first line, apranasya, for consciousness which has no... What in the world? There is something funny in the audio system. How about that? Is that bar up in the red? No. Okay. You see the bar that goes up when I speak. It's in the green mostly. Okay. Did it jump up into the red when? Okay, that's fine. Anyway, well, all technical problems with that console there, and I'm very happy that Manish is helping me troubleshoot and maintain all of that, as it's quite a nuisance. Anyway, sorry about that. Huh, strange. Okay. Continuing, where is that? Apranasya, drishehe apranasya. Consciousness has no prana, life force. Of course, prana. Atma is not born. Atma is not a living thing like a plant or a human being. Therefore, apranasya. Atma also a manaskasya. For Sanskrit students, nice bahuvrihi, that ka affix because of it being a bahuvrihi compound. Only for Sanskrit students, if it doesn't make sense to you, just ignore that completely. So consciousness has no mind, mindless. Sounds good. Consciousness, you could be sarcastic here. Consciousness is dead and mindless. Not dead, but it has no life. If it has no life, then what? Dead. Anyway, you get the point. Consciousness is independent of the life force in the body. Consciousness is independent of the mental activities of your mind. And further, that consciousness, tata, in the same way, asanginaha, that consciousness is not. I always have a problem. There is no contact with that consciousness with anything. Sangha here means contact. Generally, where there is contact, something gets affected. Right? If your hand contacts a hot surface, your hand gets affected by that hot surface. Here, consciousness is said to be asanga, unconnected, unattached, unassociated. So consciousness having no contact with anything else is not affected with anything else. Let me pause here because there's something unintuitive here. Because it sure seems like consciousness is in contact with our minds, right? Just intuitively, consciousness seems to have contact with our mind, and if consciousness has contact with our mind, then certainly it's going to be affected by everything in the mind. The problem here, and this is where it takes some heavy Vedanta. Heavy Vedanta means we're back to Satyam and Mithya. There are two different kinds of reality. The reality of your consciousness and the reality of your mind are two different kinds of reality. Just like the reality of the waking world and the reality of your dream world are two completely different realities. Any contact between the two? I've given the example before. If you're thirsty in your dream and next to your bed is a glass of water, that glass of water is useless to you in your dream. There's no contact between these separate levels of reality. In the same way, and I'll get very Vedantic on you right now. Is it proper to say that clay is in contact with the pot? And this is very Vedantic, and it's a little logical, but sometimes we need a little bit of logic. Is clay in contact with the pot. According to Vedanta, for something to have contact, they have to be two similar things. My right hand is similar to my left hand, therefore they can have contact. But in this case, clay is a substance, pot is form. Those are not similar things, right? Right hand and left hand are similar things. They can have contact. But substance and form are not similar things. Therefore, clay is not in contact with the pot. Yes, this is pure logic, but it's important logic. Clay, logically speaking, has no contact whatsoever with the pot because they're completely different kinds of reality. In the same way, the consciousness present in your mind has no contact with the activities of your mind for this same reason. Consciousness is more real than your mind, therefore, no contact. Clay is more real than the pot, therefore, no contact. This is one of the places where we use logic, and we need to use logic. This is such an important point to discern the difference between that which is real, absolutely real, and that which is not. Satyam and mithya, one of our fundamental teachings of Advaita Vedanta. Therefore, that drishi, that consciousness, has no prana, it has no mind, it has no contact with anything, and vyomavat, like space, it is vyapinaha, it is all pervasive like space. Now, Shankara introduces a new topic in the middle of this verse. He starts to go off in a new direction. So far, nature of consciousness and how completely he has described the nature of consciousness here. In fact, if you want to kind of stretch this a little bit, so the first line, that drishi in the second line, which has no prana and no mind, is talking about the nature of consciousness. Consciousness has no prana, consciousness has no mind, chit. Also, that consciousness being asanginaha, asanga, has no contact. That's actually a subtle reference to sat. Absolute reality has no contact with relative reality. Just like the clay has no contact with the pot, Sat, Brahman, has no contact with the material world. So the first line, Shankara, I think this is intentional. In the first line, he points to Chit. In the second line, he points to Sat. And in the third line, Vyapinaha Vyomavat, vast, all-pervasive like space, pointing to Ananda. So this verse very briefly, but I think very powerfully, conveys the nature of Atma as being sat-chit-ananda. And that's our prior topic, nature of consciousness. Now the next topic, I said we're going to come back to krita krityata, which he does right here. That utter contentment, utter fulfillment. He says, for Atma, since Atma is thus, he says, mama, for me, for that consciousness. So if Shankara is speaking to us in the first person here, when Shankara says, for me, he's probably not referring to his body and mind. He's probably referring to his true nature as Sat-chit-ananda Atma. So he says, Mama, for me, katam karyam bhavet. How can there be anything that needs to be done? Given the fact that consciousness is free from life force and mental activity, consciousness has no contact with anything, consciousness is all pervasive like space. What do you need? How can you improve on that? That's the language I've used before. How can you improve on that? What needs to be done? That's what his statement is, katam karyam bhavet. What could possibly need to be done? Or to use my guru's words, what further agenda could be there? Anything further that needs to be done for the sake of your benefit? Now that krita krityata is expanded upon in this next verse. Asamadhyam na pashyami, asamadhyam na pashyami, nirvikarasya sarvada, nirvikarasya sarvada, brahmano me vishuddhasya, brahmano me vishuddhasya, shodhyam chanyat vipapmanaha, shodhyam chanyat vipapmanaha. That krita krityata can be understood in two ways. One is in a worldly way. So if you, yesterday I was talking about going to Starbucks and going to the mall for the sake of finding something that'll make you happy, something that'll make you content. So we can talk of krita krityata in a worldly sense. There's nothing out there in the world that could possibly add to your present contentment. It's a nice way of putting it. Nothing out there can make you more content than you already are in your essential nature as pure consciousness. Now that's from a worldly perspective. How about from the perspective of sadhana? Not from a worldly perspective, from a spiritual perspective. From the perspective of sadhana, what other sadhana needs to be performed? Okay, you don't need to go to Starbucks, you don't need to go to the mall, but maybe, I still need to meditate. I still need to perform karma yoga and get my mind purified. So I still need, so if you have no need for worldly accomplishments, you may still have need for spiritual accomplishments, sadhana, spiritual practice. And Shankara, in actually 3 verses, he's going to make it very clear that not only are you done with your worldly seeking, you're even done with your spiritual seeking. You are, by the way, the word pakka comes from the Sanskrit pakwa, having been cooked. So that which is pakka is completely cooked. Or in American English, they say they use this with regard to cooking meat, which I don't think most of you do. Anyway, they say the meat is well done. They ask you in the restaurant, do you want it rare, medium, or well done? By the way, rare means blood is still. How do people eat this stuff? I don't know. Anyway. Well done. Pakka means well done, completely cooked. And here we're talking about a sadhaka, a spiritual aspirant, who is well done, completely cooked. Pakka in this sense, if you say it in Hindi, pakka sadhaka means someone who's really engaged in spiritual practice. In this context, it means someone, a pakwa, one who is completely cooked, is one that doesn't need further cooking, one that has no need for further spiritual practice. That's what Shankara is describing here. He says, and let Shankara speak to us in the first person here. Shankara says, na pashyami samadhim. He says, I don't see any absence of samadhi. I don't see, and a paraphrase, I don't see any need for samadhi. Shankara says, why should I practice meditation? What for? Why? Nirvikarasya sarvada. For me, for the pure consciousness, which is nirvikara, unchanging. For me, for unchanging consciousness, what good is meditation? What good is it? What is the benefit of it? You say, my Hindi is bad. Isme fayda kya hai? So, there's nothing that can possibly be accomplished for consciousness which is already unchanging. Shankara says, why do I need to meditate? Further, for consciousness which has no impurities, impurities like papa karma, impurities like raga and dvesha, his compulsions, his compelling likes and dislikes. Consciousness has none of that. So Shankara goes on to say, Brahmanaha me, for me, who is vishuddhasya, who is perfectly pure, for me who is Brahman. Shankara knows that consciousness is nothing but Brahman, the absolute reality because of which everything exists. That ultimate truth taught in the Mahavakya Tattvamasi. So Shankara, having recognized that truth, he says, for me, vishuddhasya, being perfectly pure already, anyat chodhyam kim. You have to bring the kim from the, she doesn't say kim. We have to supply it from the context. He says, kim shodhyam anyat. What needs to be purified? For me, for pure consciousness, which is already vishuddha, utterly pure, he says, where is the need for purificatory practices? Anyat shuddham, anyat shodhyam, anything that needs to be purified. For me, who is vipapmanaha, free from sin, free from impurity, there is no need to purify that which is pure. You know, sometimes I'll just give a bad example. So if you're in a village in India, you might want to boil the water before you drink it. But if you have that bottle of, what do they call it? Bisleri. Sorry, my mind is on India for some reason today, unnecessarily. No point. Anyway, if you have this bottle of water, do you need to boil it? It's already purified. You get the point. Atma is like Bisleri. Go figure. Okay. Bad metaphor. Let's continue. Shankara has much more profound than that. He says, Gantavyam chataivaham, Gantavyam chaktathaivaham, Sarvagasya chalasya cha, Sarvagasya chalasya cha, Nordhvam nadhastiro vapi, Nordhvam nadhastiro vapi, Nishkalasya gunatvam gunattvataha nishkalasya gunatvataha. Again, krita krityata, utter fulfillment or contentment from the standpoint of spiritual practice. Reaching the state where there's utterly nothing left to do, not only in a worldly sense, but even the sense of spiritual practice. He says, Gantavyam cha tata eva aham. And again, you have to supply, you see my parenthetical thing here, the style of language. there's a what do they say in Panini Sutras? There's an ahara. Is that the correct term for something that is carried forward? So this is a common technique done in all Sanskrit literature. An idea gets carried forward. And here the idea carried forward is, I do not find. He doesn't say that here. That idea is carried forward. I do not find gantavyam, anything to be reached. I do not find any goal to be accomplished. Shankara is saying, I don't need moksha. Of course, he can say that, right? I don't need moksha. Why? Sarvagasya, for consciousness, which is all-pervasive, and achalasya, unchanging. Why does that consciousness, how can that consciousness possibly need to be freed? Freed from what? So Shankara says there's no need for moksha. Further, he says, again, carrying that idea forward, I do not find anything which na urdhvam, nothing above, na adaha, nothing below, na tiras, nothing to either side. There's nothing out there for consciousness which is nishkalasya, partless, and agunatvataha. And because it has no gunas, this is a reference to something a little technical. You might think that for that vast consciousness, as vast as it is, somewhere there must be some defect, some little dark corner, some little edge that is broken. In the vastness of consciousness, there must somewhere be something wrong. And Shankara addresses that by pointing out the fact that consciousness has no parts. Consciousness has no qualities. There's no top part, down, just cut out. What about the green bar? The green bar is normal. So the green bar, so we're troubleshooting now. It went red, yes. Okay, so the green bar is normal, but you can't hear. That means that the digital part is fine. The audio system is defective. Let me turn this up. You can hear me better? Okay. We have to watch. It'll blare out in just a minute. Have some fun with this. Okay, so the metaphor that's used is a crystal of salt. Where in the crystal of salt is saltiness absent? That's the metaphor. Saltiness is present in every part of the crystal. Not only that, but every part of the crystal is equally salty. There's no variation whatsoever. we use the complicated English word undifferentiated. How's that? Too many syllables. Undifferentiated. Consciousness has no internal differentiations. Therefore, that's what Shankara says here. No nishkala, no parts. Aguna, there's no qualities in different parts of Atma. And the point here is, even though Atma is vast, in that vastness that is Atma, there's no dark corner, there's no defective bit that needs to be fixed. That's his point here. Let's see one more verse. Chinmatra jyotisho nityam, chinmatra jyotisho nityam, tamas tasmin avidyate, tamas tasmin avidyate, katam karyam amaivadya, katam karyam amaivadya, nityamuktasya shishyate, nityamuktasya shishyate. Again, completing this teaching that no further sadhana needs to be performed for this enlightened person, for Shankara, for anyone who's enlightened. He says, tasmin, in that consciousness, tamas na vidyate. There is no, and tamas can mean darkness, here it means ignorance. There is no ignorance to be found anywhere in that consciousness, just like you can't find anything other in a salt crystal. Can you find anything other than saltiness? You can see why they use that metaphor. You can't find anything else in that salt crystal. So Shankara says, in consciousness, can you find anything else? Can you find ignorance in that consciousness which is chinmatra? It is nothing but consciousness. It is jyotish. It is the light. It is the pure light of consciousness, undifferentiated consciousness. Chinmatra, consciousness, and consciousness alone. You can't find anything else there. Therefore, there is no ignorance. There is no ignorance that remains to be removed. Therefore, why study Vedanta? And I'm completely serious. Vedanta is useless for sat-chit-ananda Atma. But who comes to class? Who suffers? Who struggles? Who has a headache? Who has a problem at work? Who has a problem at home? Not sat-chit-ananda Atma. Vedanta is for that one. So that's Shankara's point here, is that consciousness has no problems. And when you discover yourself as that consciousness, you have no problems. Shankara concludes here, katam karyam mama eva adya. Again, speaking to us in the first person. Shankara says, for me, for one who is completely identified with that pure consciousness, for one who is completely disidentified with the body and mind, Shankara says, mama, for me, eva, being thus, katam karyam. How could there be anything remaining to be done for me? Anything katam karyam shishyate, remaining. How could anything further remain to be done, any kind of sadhana for me, nitya muktasya, for me the one who is eternally free. Atma never got bound. Common question. Just end with this comment. Many times people say, Swamiji, how did we get into this jivatva, this state of being a limited jiva? How did we get stuck with all this suffering in the first place? People love to ask that question. Swamiji, how did we get born into this world of suffering in the first place? Well, there are two answers for that. First of all, there was no first place. You're born due to karma. Karma's done in prior lives. And according to the doctrine of karma, strictly understood, you have had an infinite number of prior lives. There was no first life. There was no first incarnation. There was no first birth. You have to just follow the logic involved in the doctrine of karma. This can be very easily proven. So there's no first place. Then the other part of the question is, how did Atma get stuck with all this? The follow-up question. Okay, Swamiji, I understand that I had no first birth. Then how did Atma get involved with this infinite series of lives in which there is constant suffering? How did Atma get stuck with all that? And you can answer that question based on the verses we've just seen. Atma never got involved with all that. Atma never got stuck. Atma never, remember like that term, asanga. Atma never had contact. Of course, I'm not talking about physical contact. Atma never had connection or contact with suffering. Atma is eternally free from suffering, eternally free. Shankara uses the word nitya muktaha. And this will be a good place to conclude today. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschad dukkha bhag bhavet, asato ma satgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityor ma amritangamaya. Om shanti shanti shanti. Om.